If you haven't checked out Drewski's channel, please do so. He makes awesome content covering Arma, Day of Infamy, Battlefield, Wildlands, and more. His channel link is at the top of the notes below this video. Right, hi guys, it's Luton here, and today I'm speaking with, again, Drew. Welcome.
Hi guys.
We're talking about World War II, because there are a lot of World War II games come out right at the moment. You've seen me cover a few of them already. I still need to do some more stuff about Infamy, and really excited to kind of get in and have a look more with that game. I just haven't had the time to really get into it at the moment. But Drew, you've been playing a lot of Infamy, right? And you've been enjoying that?
Yes, I have. My friends and I have been really, like, last few weeks we've been going on and off with it, as well as, like, you know, lots of the games that we play is more like Ghost Recon and Siege and things like that. So we go back to it every once in a while, but I think that it has all the highlights from Insurgency and does even a little bit more on top of that in terms of, like, gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I've been looking at Battalion 1944 as well, and Days of War. Battalion 1944 is going for this kind of very old school shooter style with kind of very kind of twitchy gun control and strafe jumping. That's the kind of angle that they are taking with their game. Days of War has gone for, I would say, even a more kind of classic kind of Call of Duty 3 style action there. Still has a lot of elements which cross over. And I think that's the interesting thing, is that there's been a lot of subtle differences between these games that are coming out now. And then, of course, on top of that, we've now heard about Call of Duty also potentially being World War II, or even definitely being World War II now. So there's this huge kind of nostalgic leaning back to the World War II era, and I think it's not a great surprise, because we've been through the whole phase of modern games. We've had, like, Call of Duty doing the super futuristic stuff. Battlefield went fairly futuristic for quite a while there, and I think it's a natural transition to kind of lean back towards this way. We've also got some other things coming in as well. Let's not forget, like, Red Orchestra coming in with its, like, Vietnam, so not technically World War II, but, you know, there's basically a lot of games which are kind of well known within the sphere of FPS, and they're all kind of leaning towards, you know, these kind of historical elements right now. But are you kind of surprised how many of these games seem to be almost coming out quite simultaneously? Because I am. It's like they're just sort of all getting to that critical time at about the same time. It's like this massive World War II competition. Like, which person's going to come out on top, I don't know, but it's like they are sort of all leaning in their own very subtle individual directions though, right?
I think it was, yeah, I think it's pretty surprising, like, how so many game publishers have moved to World War II. And I think that even with the kind of modern day shooters of COD 4, like that era, and then we moved into the futuristic of the you know, later Call of Duties and the Titanfalls, and even, like, the end DLCs of Battlefield 4, and multiple other titles that I can't even remember. Like, it didn't happen all at once. It happened over, you know, 5 years of time, where different, you know, games and franchises came up and said, hey, let's go into a little bit futuristic, or go a little bit crazy with our gun attachments and maps and themes and such. And then now we just have like 2017 is the year of World War II. Like, we just slammed and just said, foot down, this is World War II, this is older games, we're gonna go back in time. And I don't think that happened with, like, the last generation, from even from modern warfare to futuristic titles. I don't think that transition was as black and white like it is now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it'd be fair to say they almost kind of lost the plot a little bit with some of the futuristic things and some of the kind of more modern elements. I think some of the stuff which came in was a bit kind of too far. And I think also, for example, like what we'd seen with Battlefield 4 and also Hardline, was this kind of, like, level cap famous for now saying, like, bloating of the game.
Yeah.
Although I'll just say that I originally came up with that idea, I just didn't get it out in time. Like, I always had that joke with Level. It was just like, dude, I was going to release that video the same week as you. But no, I think basically the point to make is that there were a lot of people kind of feeling the same kind of thing all around that time, which is that there were, like, you know, the games had just swelled with more and more content, more and more sort of configurations of weapon, more and more attachments, more and more in-game achievements, all of this stuff, loads and loads and loads of extra things, which all essentially detracted away from the base game. And so I think then naturally you get this kind of sweep back around, this progression of people feeling like, we don't want that, we want to focus back on core gameplay. And so it's only natural that then you see, like, indie devs pick up on this first, because big studios take a longer time to generally produce their games, their titles. They need to kind of, you know, have that sort of oversight ahead of time, whereas a smaller studio can kind of jump onto it and be like, oh yeah, we're going to turn this out, especially when you have something like Insurgency, and the guys are essentially just taking that and translating it rather than making a base game from scratch, right? What would you say, though, about Battlefield 1? Because Battlefield 1 creates, like, a very curious crossover. And some people have even been saying like, oh, Battlefield 1 released and it's kind of clashed in its sort of direction, because it's kind of like a World War II game, but without being said, right?
I think, yeah, it is. It's game, like, its gunplay is definitely World War II. Like, if you go World War One, you're looking at Verdun, and that's World War One.
Oh, we didn't mention
It's
that game,
definitely, yeah, it's definitely a World War One shooter, but its gunplay is most definitely World War II. Like, fully automatic rifles, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, if you made a Battlefield game with only bolt-action rifles, then it would be very, I feel like, dry. Like, if you actually made it realistic, then you would eventually just dry it out, I think, if you just, I don't know, it lose its original, like, classes and Battlefield feel. I feel like Battlefield used to be an explosive, very, you know, high impact, very high action game. But then if you move it all the way back to World War One, it's just going to be bolt actions and trenches, and and it might have some cool gameplay, but it might be empty. But yeah, it's definitely a World War II. You know, there's tanks, there's tons of vehicles driving around, and they had to make it that way, though. They really did. For a World War One game, they definitely stepped out of their comfort zone, and they had to, you know, take some setbacks off of reality to make it an interesting game.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, you know, a World War II game for me, coming from an era where I played those kind of games, you know, it's like I played all of the sort of original Call of Duties and Medal of Honor, and so you come from that time where, yeah, it's a very more kind of base game. You don't have all the detail. You don't. I mean, even these are not World War II games, but of course you have classic shooters like GoldenEye, and it's like, you know, these kind of games. There's a rawness to them which you don't get. Okay, and so like the classic Medal of Honor games and Call of Duty, there is a kind of rawness and a simplicity to them, where people really focus on that kind of, that core gameplay, which is all just about, all it is just about how you're moving and how you're getting onto those other people. And that's basically it. You know, there was not tons of crazy issues in terms of balancing weapons. That wasn't something which used to come up. You know, it's like you choose your gun, and usually the damage models are high enough that it's just literally about perfecting your gameplay and getting onto one other people. And I think that's something that people have lost the feeling of a lot, especially when you look at big titles, somewhat like Call of Duty, somewhat like Battlefield. I would say that Call of Duty, even because it's quite twitchy, you know, it kind of leans towards that sort of more, I don't know, I would say maybe skill-based, you know, a little bit. It's like Battlefield, I think often the issue with Battlefield, if you think about Call of Duty, and the issue, and also not the issue, but the fact with a lot of these games is that the maps are smaller. So that means that you have, for example, lane control issues happening there. And then when you have that kind of smaller, more narrow band focus of your attention, it means that you can focus a lot more on what you are actually doing. Whereas when you have a game like Battlefield, the arena that you're fighting within is so big that sometimes it's almost impossible to actually manage that space unless you have a really core group of people around you. You can't manage that space. You can't manage your engagement as effectively. So with the best will in the world, if you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to get caught out time and time again. And that's something that I hear from a lot of players. A lot of players that I know are skilled players and very good. And, you know, I mean, like Super, the guys on my channel know Super. Super's a really great player. But again, when we're playing rounds, and the same as me, and the same as Flame, and, you know, a lot of the guys that I play with, Numi, who's another guy who's a really good player that I play with, and the guys that we play with, it's like round to round, the scores will just go up and down, and the kill death ratios will go up and down, because you just round to round will find engagements.
It's just random. It's unmanageable. Yeah, I agree with that. Like in Battlefield 1, for example, or even Battlefield 4, I've always said that Conquest Small was a much more tactical game mode than Conquest Large. Having 32 players instead of 64 makes it so much more controllable. Makes every engagement so much more controllable, because there aren't 5 guys. Not like if you were to triple the population, like some people said, what if Battlefield 1 has 120 player servers? That would just, even if the map was twice as big, you would not want that. No. Objectives are just sometimes, in even 64 player, because there's 32 player per team, there could be 10 guys sitting on Charlie, and even if you have a really good squad of 5, that's going to be very hard to take down. Yeah. And even when you have 32 total players, it's just so much more controllable. There aren't as many people. You can move a lot more tactically, and real I guess realistic skills that work in games will get you a lot farther as a skilled player than they will in a 64-player game. Just because there's the randomness of 64 players. There's the just uncontrollable amount of people that you would have to fight. So as like as a skilled player, especially if you're playing by yourself as a skilled player, I feel like 64 is just too much sometimes. Yeah. And Battlefield is one of the games that really does show that well. I feel like playing Day of Infamy in comparison, there's like, 12 players per team, maybe some AI thrown in here and there, and it's just so much more controllable if you are a skilled player playing by yourself. You can feel the fact that you're not going to be overwhelmed unless you really ask for it.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, and of course Battlefield has stuff like vehicles thrown in the mix, but it's like, yeah, with these other titles that are coming in, it does get back to that base gameplay, and I think control is like really the key word. It's all about always, like any classic games like these, it's about controlling those lanes, controlling the areas of the map, and making sure that you are the one who is basically leading the conversation in terms of the game. Your squad, your guys, you're taking control and you're dictating how those other players are going to play. So it's really about that, about leading the control. And that's something which I think I've felt a lot with bigger titles like Battlefield, is that you often feel out of control. And we don't want to get bogged down in talking about Battlefield too much, but just to address like what you were saying about 3264, it's something that has been requested from them for a long time. And of course, like with Battlefield 1, they did have the ability to drop the player count down on the servers, but something that I thought would be fantastic and work really well is if they just focused on like a classic mode which had Conquest Small, 32 players, squad leader only spawn, really focused on those kind of things. Put that in there, and then just let the people that want to play that, and the other guys can just play the other stuff. That's kind of a direction this could go, and that's the benefit of some of these smaller titles, and there's something to get there. I would say that sort of Day of Infamy is leaning towards a kind of more kind of I would say serious team play tactical base. They're kind of leaning in that direction. Battalion are now leaning in this direction of kind of arena-ish, old school COD 2 kind of. It's sort of quick scoping, strafe jumping style. That's the way that they've decided to head down. And like I say, like Days of War are also going in this direction of a kind of like a COD 2, but again, they don't have that sort of stuff. So they've kind of gone even more kind of classic, I would say. They're kind of really the sort of default style in there. But out of those titles, I would just say, each personal preference. Which direction would you lean towards yourself? Like, where do you think that the best gameplay is at in terms of those games?
Most definitely Day of Infamy. I mean, it just has those, as I said, I think before, the core elements of Insurgency are just already so good, and already, like, as an Arma player, you and I are the people who are playing those team-based, really, I guess, games that focus on teamwork, and I guess that game is one of those, because there's the way the situations and the methods that the game modes are set up is perfect for embellishing just how teamwork is powerful. And especially
like the spawn system, right? Do you want to just remind people about that?
Yeah, like one of the game modes, for example, it's a defense, and if your team is wiped pretty well, you're gonna have to sit and wait for a guy to come back to an area to reinforce. Like you have to have a player run back from where they're trying to hold this bunker all the way, probably 200 feet back from the front line. Then he walks into a room, then everybody respawns, and so it's like, you don't want to, and as that person's running back, you don't want to have just an empty objective up there, because if nobody else is defending, if nobody else knows that, oh, a guy's already running to go reinforce our team so we can keep defending, you really have to have the communication, because otherwise you're going to lose that front line. And as a more tactical player who plays games like Siege and stuff, where it's all about teamwork, that is very appealing to me over others.
Yeah, and I think that that's definitely where I'm leaning towards as well. And I think, just to be clear, what I hear a lot of the time is people talking about realism and like, oh, if you enjoy team play and you enjoy serious gameplay, then you just want the game to be real. And it's like, no, not really at all. It's got nothing to do with that. All it is, it's about working together as a group as opposed to working as a sole person. It's not about like lone wolfing. It's not about being that kind of one-man army who can just perfect everything. It's about there's a lot of other elements that are enjoyable there, and that's where you get that from. You get that enjoyment from communicating, about actually seeing and knowing that other people are working with you, and about achieving something overall as a group as opposed to achieving it just as one person. That's the thing that's very, very enjoyable. But I think that it is interesting. I mean, one other thing we haven't talked about is kind of the limited loadouts. We talked a little bit about the bloating.
Yeah.
That is a big change up. Do you prefer that kind of gameplay? Do you prefer that kind of raw sort of... And I think Verdun is probably the best example. Like, that's... I mean, you really can't get more raw than Verdun in that. And I actually kind of do like that, mainly because it presents people on a level playing field. You know, it's like, again, you come back to Battlefield a little bit, and I just use it as a good reference point because I think it's probably the best known example of where people are coming from with this, where basically you have such a spectrum, because obviously in Battlefield you have like rock, paper, scissors, you have such a spectrum of weapon choices and loadouts. So I mean, literally the definition of rock, paper, scissors, sometimes you're going to get beaten because of a situation you're in, and you might be able to salvage it, but more often than not, you will just get beaten. And again, you have that less with these kind of games. And I wonder, is that kind of like do you think it's a yearning? Do you think people have got sick of that, and they just they want to know, like, look, I'll take this loadout, and I can deal with whatever comes my way?
Yeah, as like a really, I guess, experienced, almost pro Halo 2 player way back in the day, and also really like competitive at Halo 3. Those games, you know, you start with a loadout, and that's your loadout. Unless you pick another gun up and you memorize the guns on the map, that is your loadout. Like battle rifles, it's all about just skill. If everybody's got a single weapon in their hand, it's always the same weapon. It's all about skill. But and I feel like that's appealing to certain game modes and certain games. Especially when, you know, the guns are very balanced. But in a case like Battlefield 1 even, and we're going to Battlefield 1 with World War 2, I know, but I'm I'm comparing Battlefield 1.
It's a good point of reference.
Battlefield 1 compared to Battlefield 4, which is, again, modern day shooter instead of a World War 1 shooter, World War 1 kind of World War 2 shooter. Basically, I feel like Battlefield 1 does have less choice, but the problem with less choice is that you have to make sure those choices are very rock, paper, scissors and not unbalanced. There's guns like the Automatico, for example, that just shred through any other gun. I've been killed by every other gun, you know, almost equally, but I can tell when I use the Automatico, I am twice, maybe 3 times as effective as if I'm using just the standard, like, whatever gun you get, the MP18, I forgot what it was. But I'm so much more effective with certain weapons in that game, and I practiced with all the weapons. I did not listen to other people who said this gun's OP. I went around and I tested every single one myself because I wanted to truly, really know myself if the weapons were overpowered and not overpowered. But some of them were, and there's in Battlefield 4, for example, there's so much more choice, and some people might say it's bloated, and I will agree, not to that extent, but I will agree that some of the weapons in that game, like the Chinese Type 95s or something, just never tried them. Just never even thought about them. Just because there's so many other guns that I wanted to try out at the time that I didn't even try them. But I feel like even that, as long as the weapons were balanced, which I feel like Battlefield 4 weapon balance was just on point, like perfect, near perfect, like the best I've ever seen.
Yeah.
That was good. Like the choice was good because it gave you small inclinations towards, you know, this one's more accurate, this one's more or less recoil, this one's like less recoil but also less damage, you know, things like that, where I had certain guns in my mind that if I was doing good or bad in certain situations, I would switch to. And it's good to have a complicated, not really complicated, but just a diverse and filled up system of weapons and gear and stuff if that stuff is balanced. But I feel like in a situation like Battlefield 1, it's just not the same, where you don't really have a lot of choices, and 1/5 of those choices are what you will use 90% of the time because those weapons are so much better.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, like, a game like Dave Infamy, for example, I think is... I keep saying Dave Infamy, but I'm not sponsored. but Dave Infamy, for example, I think has pretty good weapon balance so far. I haven't really played it enough to test out every single gun, but you know, the bolt action rifles, for example, with iron sights, they do 1 shot to the chest, which I think was pretty good. The fully automatic rifles are much different, where they don't do 1 shot to the chest, and their recoil is really hard to control. So it's balances out the fully automatic rifles with the bolt action rifles. And I don't know, I just don't feel like other games do it as well. But I mean, I haven't played the Battalion or, you know, any other titles you're discussing.
I can talk a little bit about, I can talk a little bit on that. Like, so Battalion, again, because it's in this early stage, it's not really available. I think it's in closed alpha, which I'm not in. But they, from the small amount that I got to play recently, EGX Res, Battalion, it's like I say, it's going for this different style, which I've talked about on another video recently. But you know, the damage model is very high with that, and depending on, it's all about kind of knowing your weapon and knowing how you want to play that role. And I think that's always the way with many of these kind of more old school, or at least classic shooters. You know, it's like
Mhm.
the weapon dictates somewhat how you're going to play. It's more difficult to play with, you know, a bolt action rifle up close than it is at a bit of range. You know, it's always going to be the case. Some guy's got a fully automatic weapon and he can literally just spray you down at close range, but you've got to land that 1 or 2 shots on that person. You know, chances are, unless you're an elite player, you're going to get beaten every time. So it's just about kind of measuring that. Now again, that sort of leans back towards what we were saying before about rock paper scissors, but I would find that it's not quite the case, because I think sometimes when you have these guns and you're literally left with the kind of raw input of those weapons, you can learn those weapons. You can learn like how to move. You can learn how to get on target. And it's like that's the difference between someone who can literally just pick up and jump into a game and just run around, and somebody who actually plays that specific loadout, that specific style, and gets really, really, really good at it. And that's, I think, there's more, I would say there's more scope to do that in these kind of games. Now, looking at something like Days of War, which, like I said, until they fix their cheating issues, I wouldn't really play that game right now, because from every game that I played so far, when I was getting onto that game, it was just hackers
I heard
all over.
that.
Yeah,
I saw those gifs that you had of just knifing a guy over and over and him pulling around, knifing you back or whatever.
I still can't determine whether that was just me being literally the worst shot I've ever had in my entire life, or whether that guy was actually hacking, because some, like, you know what it's like when people accuse of hacking, it's like, oh yeah, bullshit, like the guy was actually just wrecking you. But it's like, I was pumping like full automatic magazines into that guy and he wasn't going down, so I think it was fair to say there were some issues there. But but like, what I will say about Days of War was that, like I said, it definitely is leaning more towards a classic style. It's more of a base classic style than Battalion 1944, which has gone in this more kind of old school stylized way. They've made some very specific choices about their game. But Days of War seemed more kind of classic in that sense. But the thing is with Days of War, they really have focused a lot on ensuring that each class plays a certain way again. So like, if you have a support guy, if you have a guy with an LMG, you know, you can't run around with that like you can in Battlefield. You know, you can't. You have to be stationary. You have to cover a point. So you see, that's why I always think it's quite interesting where these limited loadouts end up affecting players passively, because it's like, it's just limiting you, and there's not much you can really do about it. You know, there's not a great many, what you can't, it doesn't matter how skilled you are, if that gun is kicking like a bitch, like every time you fire, with the best skill in the world, you can only balance that so much. You can only, you know, compensate that recoil so much, and if it's too much and you have to be prone to activate and use that weapon, then that's just going to be the way it goes. And again, depending on how other weapons work, sort of more SMG stuff versus rifles, again, just depending on their speed of reload and their accuracy and their spread and all these kind of things, there's going to be different ways of working it. And I think that's always the case with these kind of games, which is just that those kind of loadouts game to game are changing quite a lot. So I would say, you know, differences between Infamy and Days of War are very different to Battalion and Infamy, or Battalion and Days of War. You know, they each have their own style to play. So I think that's one of the really positive things right now, is that despite the fact that there are many World War II games coming out right now, and I think unless people have actually taken the time to investigate each of those games and learn about them and how they're different, I can think that that's going to be something people are not very clear on straight out of the gate. But there is good choice for everybody, I think, with these games coming up right now. And then, of course, we've got the elephant in the room, which is Call of Duty. And I said on a video recently that I feel kind of strangely optimistic. That's probably a mistake, but
I feel as if Call of Duty. Do
you think they're going to be brave?
I think they're going to be. I think they're going to pull exactly what Battlefield 1 did, which was just like, everybody else is doing futuristic things. We're gonna bust a nut here, and just go straight. And everybody, like, when that first trailer launched for Battlefield 1, just boom, everybody was freaked out.
Do you think that Call of Duty though have gotten to a point now where they've got to take a risk?
I think they do, but also they're just. Every game they launch, just because of the fact that it's named Call of Duty, they're making tons of money. And I don't know about exactly the sales, but I knew that they outsold Battlefield 1, and so they're not really in a problem at the moment. They're not really in a trench, but
I think everybody feels like they do, right? Don't you think? Do you feel that from the community? Like, everybody always thinks like, oh, COD's like bottoming out. Not really.
Yeah. Everybody says that, and I don't like Call of Duty personally in the past few titles. I know that's like the norm, and everybody says that, but I personally like. I try to really look at games not at what the community is saying about it. It's like everybody, whenever I posted my first Ghost Recon Wildlands video, was like, "This game is shit," and it's a good game. I like it. I like playing it, so I'll enjoy it. Thank you very much. But it's like Call of Duty. I'll play a campaign. I'll be like, "That was okay. I enjoyed that." but I won't play this again. You know, that's where I am with Call of Duty. Like, all right, Advanced Warfare, that was kind of cool. I like that. I like the twist at the end, but that was it. Never gonna play this again. And
Call of Duty, I think, is in a very curiously interesting place where it's almost like it's not even fully about the game at this point. It's their community.
Yeah.
And I think even Battlefield is starting to lean in that direction as well, where people are being off-put by some community elements, and it's not even about the game anymore. That's a really interesting state to be in, where it doesn't even matter what game you make. You have attracted a certain audience, and at that point, people will just outright rule it out.
Exactly. So the super hardcore gamers of PC elitists, you know, and Battlefield gamers, for example, probably won't pick up the next Call of Duty, no matter what it is, just because it's a Call of Duty game. If Activision created a whole new series that wasn't even Call of Duty, and they like, let's say, made it World War II, if they didn't call it Call of Duty, I would expect it to get more sales than if they called it Call of Duty. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Just because of the name.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think Call of Duty faces a load of issues. Like, it's not just community, it's not just the way the game plays. There's things like, you know, the engine needs sorting out. They need to manage the server infrastructure better. You know, people want true dedicated servers. People would like a server browser, you know, all these kind of things. Until they put that in. I mean, like, I have not fully ruled out COD games as well. Like, I've sometimes checked them out, and like, touched on it and been like, hey, what is the deal this year? And then be like, oh god, no, please take it away. You know, it's just like, so I don't know. I think it's beyond redemption. I think also my own specific gameplay styles have moved beyond that point now. And the only thing with COD is like, I definitely couldn't play a COD game now. I don't think, like, permanent. I couldn't be like a full-time playing COD as my primary game.
I could not play COD once a day for 3 days a week, you know.
I might jump into it. It might be the kind of game that I could jump in and out of, but then that's what I have Overwatch for. So, you know, it's like there's other games we want there. But I think we're at this kind of strange nostalgia time. Unrelated to these other titles, we're going to come back to Battlefield for the final question, because I think this is actually a legit question to finish on. Do you think that Battlefield would have been better off to just go World War II? Just make a solid, hardcore World War II game with like tons of fantastic scenery and maps and explosions and things. Do you think they would have been better off?
I don't know, because it's so close to World War II already.
That's my point. You know, it's like,
if you change the guns and if you change the vehicles, it's World War II. Yeah. You know, and I mean, I don't know. It'd be very close. I think it'd be very close. I think, you know, I'd be interested to see if what would have happened if Battlefield 1 just said, let's go modern day again. You know, just I don't know. I feel like it'd be very close to Battlefield 4 because, I mean, honestly, the games are extremely close to each other in terms of gameplay, but I feel like Battlefield 4, in my opinion, is better just because of its diversity and its complexity, and also just the fact that it has so many DLC maps already out that might as well play it. Like if someone walked up to me and said, "What's a good first-person shooter that I can start on, that I can start playing games on, and I can play it for 3 more years and still like it after 3 years," I would say Battlefield 4. You know, just because that is the package at the moment of like one of the best and now most refined shooters that we've got, and even Battlefield 3. Even Battlefield 3 is still, like, I was playing it a few weeks ago, still amazing. You know, it's not clunky at all, very smooth playing, and has absolutely controllable, very, I guess, just instinctive and intuitive gameplay. Yeah. And it's just perfect. It's such a good game, and
you have to come jump on my server, dude, to get some BF3 close quarter maps happening again.
Yeah, we do.
I did that the other day, and we just were playing back to back. It was just extreme fun. Like, it's really, really good. You can just get those games full up like straight away, and it's awesome. Yeah. But I'll just round off by saying then, you know, I personally, I think I would have preferred to see a World War II Battlefield this time around than going World War One, just because of how it turned out. It's like, I don't disagree with what you were saying earlier about, like, if they'd have gone World War One, you're looking at Verdun and how would they have made that work. But what I was interested in, when I first heard they were doing World War One, I was like, damn, that is a risky, like, what a brave thing to do. Yeah. You know, they have chosen like a difficult thing to make work. How are they going to make this work? And then I was like, oh, they made it work by doing not World War One. You know, and it's like, so I thought, I went from seeing something that I thought was really like a brave sort of outstanding thing to do to going like, oh, well, they've actually just translated in this other way. So I guess my point was just like, why bother at that point? But
I still honor them for being as brave as to say we're gonna make a World War I themed game, and I think that
it was innovative in a way. I'll let them have that. You know, I'll let them have that.
I think Battlefield 1 did something good with you know, just the fact that they didn't go default World War II, because if you go look at World War II games, it's the same art design, it's the same types of maps, it's gonna be just the same all around, especially when they're always on, like, focusing on the Allies. You know what I mean? They're always focusing on Western fronts type of stuff. And I think Battlefield 1, in an artistic view, was so much better than if they went World War I or World War II. In an artistic view, in terms of like level design, maps, vehicles, and weapons, it threw us a totally different world that nobody knows about. And it did good in that. It did good in that. It might maybe it cuts back on gameplay. I think it's still pretty good, but maybe it cut back on gameplay compared to if they went World War II. But there is a person out there who says, I think I like the way this tank looks better than a World War II tank. You know, there's got to be
the classic tanks, the land ships were always a really interesting kind of sort of culture element there. But yeah, the last thing I'll just say though then is yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but also World War II had a lot of arenas that were not utilized fully in previous games, and again, it was kind of not that dissimilar from the stuff that they presented in Battlefield 1. I mean, you go back to some classic titles like Medal of Honor when they were going to the east, and you had sort of some Call of Duty titles as well where they would go to like you know, with the Russian fronts and stuff like this. So there were different elements there as well, and Call of Duty World at War that had like Russian stuff in the mix as well as allies and things. So there was all different kind of things going on with it. But yeah, I'll just say, we'll finish up by saying, guys, that, you know, there are a load of different theatres of war, different events that have happened in history that have not been extensively covered. Things like Korea and stuff like this, or you know, as has been suggested before, you got like the period of like the 70s and the 80s where you did have some elements, some battles happening and things like this. But, you know, think about more like, imagine if you had like a kind of period Rainbow Six where you had like the weapons and stuff from the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of hostage taking and terrorism and stuff in the 70s and 80s. You could definitely build like a classic kind of Rainbow Six sort of feel around that. That would be pretty interesting. We've seen Vietnam, of course, done in multiple iterations. That's something which has been covered relatively well, but of course we've got Red Orchestra coming up with that, and that's going to be really, really exciting. Another thing that we've talked about, which has never really been covered extensively, was kind of cartel South America. Not necessarily wars, but kind of paramilitary operations and things like this. And again, you know, that was something which was extensively commented about around Battlefield Hardline. Why didn't they choose to do that? It made a hell of a lot more sense. Instead of having like downtown LA gun battles from Heat, why didn't they go to like South America? You could have had some amazing engagements like from the movie Clear and Present Danger, where you're having these kind of paramilitary operations in the jungle, or like in sort of, you know, downtown sort of, you know, South American towns, and sort of, you know, gun battles across the streets. Imagine stuff actually kind of similar to like Favela from Modern Warfare and things like this. So you know, there's loads of scope there, and I wish that they would break away. I almost, as much as I do enjoy World War II games, it's just like, Jesus, man, 4 at once. I don't know, like I kind of
I agree with that. It's just like there's so much more in terms of war and history that's out there. It's just that I guess that somebody's just scared of going, well, if we cover the, you know, Kurdistan rebellion, then nobody's gonna know about it. Like if Battlefield just said, hey, remember that one time that those guys in Iraq, you know, fought the military and overthrew them? Yeah. It's just like nobody knows about that, sir.
I hear this a lot actually, because you know, a large proportion of my audience is from the US, and I actually hear from a lot of guys who are like ex-military saying that they would really like to see some games made more about you know, Middle East engagements like we had with Iraq and, you know, Gulf War. I mean, Gulf War was like a little while ago and things like this.
I would be extremely excited for stuff like that.
Yeah, I think honestly though, it's still within people's lifetimes, and I think that game companies struggle to pitch that kind of stuff. It either has to be, and I can understand that. I can, because it's very hard to market and pitch a game like that when it's potentially still affecting people's real lives.
And like,
and I
this
think that's a hard
is
thing
fun,
to do.
you know, and people are suffering because of it.
But then, you know, but then again, then you get into a whole different ball game of discussion where what is reality, you know, and is it, you know, for example, what's the difference at that point between movies and games, and so it gets very, very complicated. But I think we'll wrap it up here, guys, and we'll just say, you know, like I said, there's these different engagements that are all around the world. What game would you like to see featured? What historical sort of military FPS or something would you like to see? All these kind of different engagements, whether it's something that's more paramilitary or something which is like a classic, well-known engagement. What would you be interested in? Tell us down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.